saw your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good group down there. Frances Fox, thank God bless her, all those people. That was really good.
Well, she's just agreed to come on our advisory board, too.
Oh, good, good. She's really good.
She is.
I told her, I said, I saw her climbing out of the windows at Columbia. I remember from '68. She said, I was climbing in. And I said, well, whatever was a good direction. And welcome.
That was called Liberating the President's Documents.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Anyway, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you.
A great pleasure to welcome to the program Gerard Colby. Now, Gerard Colby has a heck of a resume and everything. I'm not sure I can go over it all, but he's the president of the first word is National Writers Union, an organization involved with the interests of the writers and so forth. And he's also an investigative journalist. He's also an author of many interesting books and so forth. And welcome very much, Gerard Colby, to Conversation. Great pleasure to welcome.
Great pleasure to be here.
No, it's really good. And I wonder if you could, as I said to you before, we'd like to maybe could share your own background, where you're born, raised, educated a little, and then we can get into a conversation.
Well, actually, I was raised in New York.
Okay.
I was raised in an area called Bayside West, which is on the border between Bayside and Flushing. I went to Holy Cross High School there. I went for a year to St. John's University, and then my father died, so I went to work. And then finally...
St. John's Catholic School?
That's right. That's correct. And my interest was English literature at the time, and I went into... But the war had occurred, and I was, at that time, I was rather conservative, even though I was a supporter of John Kennedy in 1960. But thanks to my mother, I did not get my head blown off.
You actually went in the service?
No, I wanted to. And unbeknownst to me, my mother went down to the draft board and said, he's my sole source of support.
Yeah, that was a claim, yeah.
So she made an agreement with me that if I would just apply to one school, one college, to go back to school, and if the draft came and they grabbed me before then, she wouldn't fight. And I was accepted to State University of New York. It was a small college in Oneonta, which was
Oneonta State,
And I 2 days before my final induction notice.
You were there, so you avoided it.
So I avoided it.
What year would that have been?
1966.
That's 66. So
yes, January of 66 is when I entered.
Yeah, that was coming into that Vietnam thing, and it
That's
started
correct.
to heat up in
That's
66.
why I was down.
And your sentiments were in 1966, we ought to go over and win that war.
Absolutely, I was very conservative.
You were very conservative?
Yes, I was. As a matter of fact, I was a member of an organization called the Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, which was founded by
Ayn Rand stuff? Or
Bill Buckley, that's right.
Bill Buckley, and Ayn Rand,
Milton
objectivism and that?
Yeah.
Milton Friedman also,
and quite a few people. And matter of fact, I met, my first wife I met at a conservative conference that was held at Bryn Mawr.
And what was the context of thinking within the family dinner table and all that kind? Was it a conservative figure coming out of it?
Very different. My mother was a New Deal Democrat. My father was he called himself a Lincolnian Republican. He was pro-civil rights. He's the kind of Republican that we have in Vermont, where I live now.
Yeah.
Reasonable. You know, having a conservatism that you could really strike some chords with, coming out of an improvement on Locke, and not married so much to the economic precepts of Adam Smith as much as to the philosophical points of Adam Smith.
He was a moral philosopher.
That's correct.
Essentially, that's what he was.
That's correct.
And he also lived in a world where you had no mass production or anything like a factory or anything.
Right.
It was a different kind of a context. But he did set the pace for what is the modern experience in terms of economics and that sort of thing.
That's quite so.
You said in the chat before we started that the family Colby goes back to 1630?
1630 in this country.
And this is on your line? You can trace that back?
Yes.
You are a real pioneer. You have real pioneer stock.
Well, we also have German side that just came over in the 1900s.
1900s,
but the family went back, as I mentioned to you, to the Battle of Hastings.
You can trace back to 1066.
We can trace it back to it was a squire for William the Conqueror. Yes.
That's what I said.
It was spelled Colbie at that period.
But it was Anglo-Saxon.
It was it was Norman, but it became Anglo-Saxon.
Wait a minute.
Into a
it
Y.
was Norman. It was Norman. That was Bill Conqueror, the conqueror who
William
conquered
my
namesake Harold.
You were on
Harold
the other side.
was whipped by William the Conqueror in 1066, and you were part of the invading
innocent.
force. You're one of the Norman invaders,
Yes,
is that it? Oh,
that's
you're
right.
coming from France. You're French.
Right.
French fries, French freedom fries, right? No, but it goes back. Well, actually, Channer, my name's Channer, it had a descendant. We did it from 1623, there was a knight, Sir Ralph Channer, yeah. So it goes way back in England's green and pleasant land,
it
that
does,
sort of
it
thing.
does.
And you go back, but you're a pioneer in this
Well, the family,
country.
the Colby family was, they came in with Governor Winthrop in 1630, and then they gradually migrated north through Massachusetts, and once the clearances of the indigenous people was resolved, they went on to Maine and New Hampshire, where my immediate family was from, around Keene, and then they migrated further up to Vermont, where I have some family members.
How did you arrive as a young man in your late teens and everything to a conservative position, do you think? Where did it come from? How did
Probably
you come to that?
came from my father.
And if I may, I did a program a couple days ago with some, or aired a couple days ago with some friends, Paula Glory and Joshua Walensky, and I asked, we were trying to get at what do we mean by progressives? We say progressives. A lot of people that are liberals or something call themselves progressives. And Josh came up with a great thing. He said, well, it's an interesting thing because Social Security, which was a great thing for the older folks, was instituted 72 years ago. And are we for conserving that? So there's an element, you want to conserve some of the things as opposed to a progressive. But, those are the tensions of two ways of seeing the world.
That's true.
What's there, what is good to preserve, and then the other one is to, let's say, transform
So you
things.
balance the two. That's the key, and that's probably been the genius of the American system. But we also should probably remember that a lot of the prosperity in the United States was indeed a result of expanding frontiers. First,
Mr. Turner.
That's right. Again, Frederick Jackson Turner. And when that market, if you remember, in 1829, James Madison said that 100 years the United States would come into a great crisis because the frontier would be over. It actually wasn't 1929. It was in the 1893 to 96, 7
Closing
Depression.
the frontier then? Or
That's right. It was 1893 was the Great Depression, and that's the period when the United States made its first decision since probably the annexation of Hawaii, but also the war against Mexico to expand overseas into the Caribbean.
What year you said again?
Around 1898 was the war. 1893 was the Depression.
1893 was a great depression. I didn't realize.
It was the most serious depression in American history up to that point. As a matter of fact, it was so
Not
bad.
so serious as the 29 crash.
Up to that point.
Up to that point.
That's
There
right.
have been a lot of turmoil and everything.
Well, they went to some people in Washington finally went to John D. Rockefeller and asked him, what should we do? And he said, dependent on domestic markets, we would have failed a long time ago. Matter of fact, the move of Standard Oil Company to New York was very much conditioned upon the expansion of particularly Standard Oil of New York into the European markets, finding themselves competing with the Nobles and the rest.
Yeah, the traditional thing, the Anshan. But this tension between I guess it's still there about what we mean by progressive and about change and about conserving and that sort of thing is still there, and it was in your family. What did you come to see the war in Vietnam differently? What caused was it
a friend came home.
Tom Hayden's Poor Huron statement, or what
it would take something much more dramatic. I was actually a very die-in-the-wool conservative.
Really? Why do you think?
Why?
Can you trace that? I mean, it's maybe not fair. I mean, well, it's like an anthropologist wanting to understand.
Yeah. Well, you look at this.
Was it patriotism or?
It was patriotism, but it was also looking for where the roots were of the institutions in the United States.
Okay.
Now, granted, when I read Vance Packard on the Hidden Persuaders, remember that book on the advertising industry?
I did an interview
with him.
Yeah, I've got it up on YouTube now. He was great.
He was wonderful. And that was an awakening for me that supply and demand balancing really didn't function if you were creating wants through advertising. So that started to shape or influence my move away from classical liberalism, as it's called, or economics of supply and demand. And the fetishism about markets finally broke through on the way government spending is intervened into the process. The longer you look into American history,
Keynesian notions, or
well, actually, coming to the point where, when you look at the history of the United States, you see consistently, and Madam Smith was all in favor of this government intervention and to grease the wheels of to create the infrastructure, whether it be roads or canals and things like that. So you realize there's a role for government and social capital to play as well. And when you get into the point of the war, I was still conservative during the war, but and I had been writing columns up in Oneonta, where I went to school, for the war.
For the war in Vietnam.
For the war, trying to analyze Marxism, trying to analyze what communism was about in Southeast Asia. And essentially I was repeating a lot of what other people had said in the conservative movement.
Was that cueing off George Kennan's Containment, which was the large
that's correct.
Strategic thing?
That's absolutely correct. Kennan, by the way, is in our latest book, but yes.
In your latest book is George Kennan?
Is
the
George
X article or what?
The X article, the whole experience of the post-war era.
Yeah, that was a way of seeing the world that informed a good deal of our growing up, didn't it?
That's absolutely correct.
Until '89,
That's
think,
right.
Yeah. And it may still in some people's mind.
Well, when we went into this whole experience in Vietnam, a lot of us had the same patriotic views, and we thought we were fighting against dictatorial systems, which we may think we were, but in reality, there are also systems, or at least being led by nationalist movements like Ho Chi Minh.
But we tried to conflate it with communism.
Well, he
Don't
was
you
a
remember
communist.
Mr. McCarthy? Did you support McCarthy? Were you young enough, old enough?
No, I didn't support McCarthy.
I
he was
have
too
a
far
list.
to the right. Too far to the right.
He would be too far to the
My
right.
father hated McCarthy.
He did. Now,
Yes,
isn't
he
that
did.
interesting? But your father counted himself a conservative.
Yes, but
See, that's interesting.
but a Lincolnian conservative.
A Lincolnian
Republican. You're for civil rights. You see the balance between you're moderate in your conservatism.
Moderate, yeah. Okay,
like I said, we have some of those still in Vermont.
Yeah. Vermont's a very interesting state up there.
We a friend came home dead from Vietnam. Another one came home from the Dominican Republic without an arm. I had to take my politics much more seriously.
Yeah.
I did studies. I found out what Dominican Republic was all about with the American Sugar Refining Company and some of the people that were actually involved in the negotiations for the United States government. Ellsworth Bunker, in particular, had family ties to the sugar industry, and Adolph Burley, at that time when
he was a big voice.
Burley.
In the, I think I can play him with Roosevelt. And
Burley was
he was part of the brain trust.
That's correct.
Yeah,
but the conservative side of the brain trust.
Yeah,
he was brought back in '38 after the collapse of the '37 stock market. If you remember that.
I don't remember. There was another collapse in '37.
That's right. It was the worst. It was a worse collapse since '29, and that's when Roosevelt woke up again and said, my God, my predecessors, Herbert Hoover, who may have been right, it's foreign markets that we have to be concerned about. And he brought back Adolph Burley and appointed him Assistant Secretary of State.
That's right,
for Latin America with the mandate to, as he put it, clear the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese who were building their
empire,
but also building their trade relations with Peru and other countries and even with Japan.
Now we got China building their trade relationships all over the world, and huge dimensions.
Countries do that.
But what's happened? That thing, maybe it's worth just going over that Kennan thing, where they had the idea, or just traditional geopolitical thinking. You go to Haushofer or Mackinder or anything like that, and they said that there was a famous dictum: "He who controls the North European plain controls the heartland." And the heartland was that part of the interior of the Eurasian landmass, invulnerable to sea power. And then he who controls the heartland controls the world island. That was essentially the whole of the Eurasian African landmass. And he who controls the world island controls the world. And so much geostrategic thinking with British notions of sea power and so forth along the rimland, that was the context within which geostrategic thinking was evolved. The X article, Mr. Kennan, and that's what informed the whole ball game.
Well, as a matter of fact,
and that's what they saw when they saw communism in Russia. That's an ideological thing to that. And then China fell in '48. So we had this big red amoeba coming out at us. And they're going to come and take over San Francisco.
But there was that's true. But there was also a conception of that Kennan had, which was accurate.
Yeah, it's going to be nationalism.
And that is if they could get
containment.
I've gone through his papers, and what comes through is a very interesting perspective. If you can, number one, surround them.
Yeah, contain it.
Contain it.
Containment.
Make sure, and the key to containment was to make sure that Lenin's concern that the communist revolution did not expand, as he hoped it would, into the industrial heartland of Europe. Ergo, the Marshall Plan was very key, and ergo, the Saudi Arabian oil was key for the conversion of the energy base inside post-war Europe from coal to oil. And the reason why is because the communist parties were very active in the trade union movement, including they were going on strike in the coal mines.
And 50% of the world population was reading and cottoning on to a Communist Manifesto.
That's true.
And there was a thing that there was going to be a communist takeover, a socialist takeover of the capitalist world and so forth. And that was the thing. And all of that seems, and it's really interesting that all our agencies, M5, Mossad, CIA and everything, missed with all of their things. It's kind of indicative of things in Iraq, maybe. I don't know. But they missed. It was totally caught on surprise by the implosion of the Soviet Union, it seemed.
Well, the people that predicted
that's how tuned in they were to what the reality
They weren't tuned in, but Kennan was. He understood that.
He said nationalism would emerge.
But he also said if you could contain them and get them involved in an arms race, you could drain them of their capacity to actually modernize their own system. And
a lot of people think that's what Mr. Reagan did.
Well, that's exactly what he did. As a matter of fact, Nelson Rockefeller, when he was...
You've written a book about him.
That's correct.
We're going to get to that.
Rockefeller predicted that as well, and when he was Eisenhower's top national security person in 1954, December 54 to December 55. Most people forget that. But he was in charge of he was chair of the first special group, which oversaw all the CIA activities at that time. He was the vice chairman of the Operations Coordinating Board. Matter of fact, I think he was chair. So his concerns in his papers, particularly from Quantico, the Marine Corps base conferences that were held there, was to make sure that the Soviet Union was drawn more and more into an arms race that they could not afford.
You don't think it was a thing that at a systemic level, it's interesting because the Marxists are very interesting people. I like a lot of Marx and some of those Trotskyists, and they're so... How many angels can dance on the head of a dialectical interpretation of something, you know? But I love them, and they're all. And one of the things they've had, you know, at the basis, they're trying to have something in place that's going to help the people against the power interests that are usually able pretty well to take care of themselves. They've always had that, but then the question is, what's happened, and where do we stand, and how do we define the human condition? How do we understand it? You know, that's something new. That
the balance again between science and rationality and the humanitarian issues.
That's another dialectic.
You know, you would like to see science actually, committed to help humanitarianism. But when science becomes scientism, and people get into that, very often people become expendable. So you really have to confront that. Make sure science serves humanity rather than the other way around.
A general question to key off is, I'm wondering, are you optimistic for the human prospect?
Yes, I am.
And you are, okay. You're not Pollyannistically, so you're optimistic.
No, I'm guardedly optimistic.
Guardedly, okay, that's good. And then one other thing that's interesting to me on a large dialectic is the idea, we've been advancing for 200,000 years after we come out of the Serengeti Plain and everything. We get to a point where we extend our consciousness and we can create technological systems and create an environment different than that in which we were born, in Eden-like sense. And one of the only creatures that could really do that in any serious dimension. This question, I don't know whether you're aware of it. I don't know if you're aware of Michio Kaku. No. He's co-founder of string theory, brilliant fellow.
Oh, okay.
And he's in the media describing science. You're talking about rational science to the people where we can understand the complexities of physics. Help co-founder with Mr. Green of string theory. But he tells me, and he was mentored by Edward Teller, and he brought it up on a program, and he brought it up, that we have weapon systems that have developed over the course of from special theory of relativity and all that, with all of our cleverness and everything, that there are weapon systems now that are in place that if they were to be unleashed would mean the end of our species on this planet. Does that resonate with anything that seems like truth to you?
Well, particle physics.
And if so, when did we reach that point out of 200,000 years? And if we've reached that point, is it an existential new reality in which all of our public affairs that we're trying to frame this stuff is to be conceived? And one last thing, if I may.
Yeah.
If that's a destructive scenario, what on the positive side would be something equally existentially significant to the evolution of affairs in this part of the universe as this idea that we're going to join entropy and blow everything up because we simply can't get through to a newer level or something? What would be the positive side as existentially, comprehensively significant to the evolution of consciousness? If you can follow all that.
Yeah,
and Mr. Dennett is somebody
I did. Yeah,
he deals with these kind of issues.
Yes, he does.
Yes.
Just as, to simplify that as
yes,
much
please,
as I can.
if you can. Haiku.
To, just as culture is humanity's mediation with nature, and that's how we evolve, more faster, obviously, than we evolve physically. So also, I believe that government is the mediation, and that takes humanity at this point, simply because of the amount of capital, the amount of human beings involved in the processes of production now. It is government that will decide where we go.
You think? Yeah.
I do.
Where does? Okay.
But the
there's
issue
the tension
here,
with the private sector. You see government as a
well, there's
public
potential,
sector, private
but
sector.
it's again, it's a balance between the needs of the public, and there is a tendency for people to become ideologues on either side of this issue. Ideology is false consciousness. Well, I do believe that science has to be a guide, but also there are certain basic humanitarian principles.
Do you think it's possible to be a scientific fundamentalist?
That's interesting.
I don't know. It just occurred to me.
You mean a fundamentalist who's also
or
a scientist?
A fundamental. There could be fundamentalists who think, let's say, just on the issue of
if they can separate religion from their religious convictions from their science, it's possible. Of course, it's possible. But if they allow science as second, and argue for the creationism and all that kind of stuff, that's not science.
Well, if they just say that there is, like, it seems to me that we're nested in mystery, that there's going to be, even if we arrive at another level, like we speciate, or we're coming to the end of the human experience, we're going to come into a new relationship to universe. It's a series of singularities, but it's we do not know everything about the universe.
Right, we're just beginning.
It's fundamental, like a religious, spiritual thing. We know the way the universe is set up. There are scientists who would try to say, we know everything from this, or the string theory of everything. You could be fundamentally on that side, and then there comes up questions like it'll introduce us to another level, hierarchical level of understanding, but there'll still be a priori mystery out beyond that.
Yeah,
so you can only accept a priori mystery in a certain ultimate sense, or a synergistic resonancy.
Well, that's good. That's actually very good.
So there's no fundamentalism anywhere, whether scientific
I don't think
or
fundamentalism actually works in anything.
Yeah,
right. To be honest with
it's
you,
a synergistic universe we exist in, I think.
That's right. We're constantly learning. We have to accept that.
Yeah.
I do believe, though, there's a real immediate threat.
Yeah.
And I don't think.
Well, extinguishing the species is a pretty big. But do you think that doesn't make sense, or is that just?
No, it makes sense because I'll
tell
you
as a reality, not as an inflection
point. The application of particle physics and others into laser weapons is very serious because they're now planning on mounting these weapons into the U.S. Space Command on satellites.
Right.
And this war is not going to ultimately be in space. It's going to be unearthed where they will beam these down. This is as insane as the tens of thousands of missiles that are looking at each other still.
Full spectrum dominance. That's the thing. Star Wars.
That's right.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But the thing is, it's a destructive capability that simply has not been characteristic of our situation on Earth. I mean, Second World War, we were protected in our impotence. We only had one little big bomb that we could drop on Hiroshima.
That's true.
But Michio Kaku comes up and he seems to come up with, he says around the year 1970 that we crossed that existential line, and that we could destroy. He said it could be even more than that. A good deal rest of the life forms on the upper, what we think of as upper end associated with us, primates and so on, could be destroyed if the weapons were unleashed. We couldn't do that when William the Conqueror. He could only do a little bit of England, you know, but through time with the relative. Do you understand what? Is it time of some sort of qualitative transformation in the evolution of
I think there's a new there's a new paradigm that's already being created. A new paradigm is already emerging now. I'm not into the new age concepts on that level, but I do see a new paradigm, and I see it among the youth, how they deal with communication.
Yeah.
And the extension of how easily they get involved in the extension of communication in the electronic world. You know, even if they don't understand, and I don't understand everything that goes on in a TV camera or that goes on in the internet.
You don't understand everything that goes on in the internet? Shame, shame.
But they, at the same time, they apply it, and they apply it very easily, much easier than I do.
I know, it's
so I think that's one.
You get a 10-year-old.
But there is another point I think that a lot of people are missing about what's greatly potential optimism. It's also a potential for disaster too, and that is that most of the wealth that we have under capitalism was a result of the accumulation of living labor power at the point of production.
Yeah, certainly what Marx always said.
That's
surplus
right.
value
division of labor. Well, even you know, that's Adam Smith makes those basic cases too about division of labor. So you get into the point about and specialization. So you get in finally into the era around the 1920s, and you see things popping up in the culture. You know, you start seeing Eugene O'Neill write a play called The Dynamo, if you remember that play. It was an interesting play about...
I do,
and you hear things coming out of the culture about the application of science and that's the point.
H.G. Wells.
That's the point in the 1920s that you actually can see statistically some of the growth in productivity as a result of not living labor power, but of machinery.
Well, yeah.
Statistically. And that's the first time we actually see a certain real displacement of human beings from the point of production, even as the corporations are making more money. And you see that
if you have a cotton picking machine that can pick 10,000 bales of cotton, you don't need the people. But if you own the machine,
but
you
in
get
the old
some
days,
payback.
that would create more jobs. What you see,
well, that's what happened after agriculture.
That's right.
They all
in the
went to Detroit
1920s,
factories.
for the first time, we see that begin to change.
Yeah.
And
in
we
the
see
20s,
the unemployment level go up. And part of that is the mechanization of the farms. 17 million people moving into the cities.
The farmer was the main job in the turn of the 1920th
Everything
century.
has changed.
Family farms.
And it's been speeding up since then. So when I was a kid, remember I talked about Vance Packard.
He was a great guy.
Right. Well, I never met him. I would have loved to have met him.
I'm here to tell you, he was a wonderful guy. He wrote a book, The Ultra Rich. That was after The Hidden Persuasion. That's what we talked about.
You really should play his shows then. I love
It's on YouTube for all the world to see. You can go to
great.
YouTube and have a 1-hour conversation, or hear a 1-hour conversation.
That's wonderful.
In a very human context. A beautiful guy, beautiful sensitivity.
Well,
and it's on YouTube
he
forever.
He dealt with some of these issues, and the waste makers and so on. He's talking about a society that's now overproducing so much and can't find the markets for it. Now, that's always been a case. But now you're producing products with and less labor time involved in the production of the same number of goods as a century earlier. You're displacing more and more human beings from the point of production. The technological unemployment that is affecting now.
That's what Lord Keynes warned about.
That's right.
Did you ever see that?
Yes.
To his grandchildren, 1930, you're going to be and what's wrong with the thing is that the technological instruments, or the capital instruments, are all owned by a plutocratic class.
That's right. Well, that's
the people have no ownership, and the liberals have never asked the
they've never come to grips with that.
My granddaddy was a union organizer in Detroit of the Guild of the Lithographers, and then there was all this thing. They were really fighting for that. But the unions and the workers and everything, they never argued for we should own some of that. And why the progressive community doesn't say they should have an ownership stake in the technology that is creating wealth.
Well, there was an argument.
Because they got this labor theory of value thing that they're all hung up on, and they ought to get over that and become a real challenge to the system if we want to avoid blowing everything up.
Well, the Germans, and the Europeans actually do take stakes as union stakes in companies. In this country, that was barred.
It was barred philosophically.
And barred legally. Because I remember Walter Reuther back in the 1950s.
Legally it was, yeah.
Remember in the 1950s, there was a whole migration of engineers out of the United States going, these were aerodynamic engineers, and where they were going was Japan. And the reason they were going for
I'm sorry, what year?
1950s, late 50s. Late 50s.
Okay.
At that point, Walter Reuther, who was the head of the United Auto Workers, which is the head of my, which really is our parent union.
Yeah, right.
Walter Reuther walked into the Big Three and said to them, do you realize what's happening? These people know how to develop streamlined, lightweight cars. They bodies. They do not build these huge, gigantic, heavy frames that you hang on all your accessories and you put your fins on. They also can develop high compression, fuel-efficient engines. If you don't change, you're not only going to lose them, these engineers, but on top of that, you're going to lose the world market.
Well, they've done it.
And they told them, get out. You like your pensions, you like the way things are, you like your benefits, forget it, go, and besides, you don't have any role to play in this company just because you're workers or unions. We don't give you any equity holding. Now it's all coming. And by the way, this is described in David Halbersham's book, The Reckoning.
Oh, really? Okay, I haven't seen it.
Which is a good title.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it is.
We're living on
He's
The
a good
Reckoning
guy.
now. Yes,
I've not met him. You know him?
I don't know him, but I've
really
seen him interviewed, and I've also read his books. And, and of course, this book on Vietnam was very whole escalation, the best and the brightest, was very influential.
Yeah, right. That was really good, and that Vietnam thing. And we started out talking about that. You finally came around to being against that war?
Yeah.
I wrote a paper when I was in college. I'm older than you a little. And I wrote a paper in 1954, I remember, because it was against the Vietnam thing. But it was all argued at a level of geostrategic. It's not in our national interest. And I was writing this paper, and then by the time 65 came, 66, it became emotional. You know, it's a different thing than just thinking against the idea geostrategically.
My evolution was was my discovery of Turner and a lot of people that were writing at that time, Marty Sklar was involved in some of this writing. Remember Marty? And I was a conservative in the economics club at Oneonta when Marty came down and delivered the lecture.
Well, that's going way back. When did you change, or where are you now?
It was around 1967.
A lot of people were doing some changing around 67.
Which may have been one of the first.
Were you one of those guys that went to and tried to levitate the Pentagon along with that?
No,
you weren't doing that.
No, I wasn't that bad.
Yeah, that was a pretty good crew too. They stood around and said, "Levitate it."
That's fun. Well, that's the problem. The fighting with absurdity is very, very effective.
Well, I'll tell you that's one true. But I'll tell you, if you could not laugh at the theater of the absurd,
couldn't get through any of this.
You couldn't survive.
That's
I mean,
right. Well, it's the same way it is now.
It's like the theater of the absurd out there now.
Well, I actually began to write pamphlets on the history of the American presidencies to examine the constant expansion aspect that was involved in the search for new markets, for products, for labor resources, and then finally for capital investment.
Yeah.
And I went through an evolution, and then I led an anti-war march in Oneonta, which is one of the earlier
67?
ones. 67.
That's early. Yeah, it's before
that's right.
Kent State.
And the government down there, I knew most of the people.
You made a big transition upstate New York.
We did make.
Did you have a road to Jerusalem epiphany or something? There was a big
it was
shift?
my epiphany, and I'll tell you.
Was there anything in particular? Was it a lightning bolt or something that all of a sudden happened all in a moment, a nano moment?
It was the Tet Offensive.
The Tet Offensive, okay.
The Tet Offensive came together with a lot of things because what was important about that was they didn't have a military victory, but they had a political victory. And they made a point. By hitting 120 villages and cities at once, they showed that they had the support of the population. They could not have moved all those weapons in as funerals to hide them in the
sea within which the fish swim.
As Mao Zedong said, And that turned me around, and I realized that's when I started to do the study of Ho Chi Minh and his role as really a leader of the nationalist movement there. And it bankrupted the whole theory, as did Mao Zedong, that you could not be a nationalist and still be a communist, because that was the argument. You couldn't be. It was not true. So they, at any rate, I
and
moved
the
from there.
intelligence was flawed in a cosmic sense. They missed the big things. Or we just had the intelligence about Iraq going in there. Now that was done, whether that was ideologically lardered and done or so forth, or maybe it was just plain out of tunnel vision ignorance because they got a thing set up where they're not really thinking about things comprehensively. They're thinking about things from a prefixed, but
I think that's true.
You can't trust the intelligence of the intelligent.
But you remember what Adam Smith made the argument for about the hidden hand behind capitalism.
Hand,
That's right, the invisible hand.
Yeah.
The invisible hand really was empire. That's what made the American economy function first in the conquest of the continent and then expansion into the Caribbean, expansion into the Philippines as a stepping stone to the great market of China, and Cuba as a coaling station, and then finally the Panama Canal, the overthrow of the government in Colombia that was in Panama.
But we hadn't been as much of a colonial power as the European powers had been.
Well, you tell after the 50,000, you tell after the 50,000 American troops that moved into the Philippines, including Douglas MacArthur's father, and the huge amounts of people that were killed in the Philippines.
Okay.
Tell that to the Puerto Ricans that had already won their revolution against the Spanish. Tell that to the Cubans who won their
but I think a case could be made for, let's say, just in terms of geostrategy, that after the Second War that we did that Marshall Plan and we had won and everything, and that there was not a residue of bitter hatred against the United States. Let's say if we go into the Middle East, that there was against the British and against the French. And remember Algeria.
There is a bitter.
We didn't have that, and we had a pretty good stock as
in
far
Latin
as
America. There was a lot of
Latin America.
Anger.
That's what I meant with Cuba.
But with respect to also in all the dollar diplomacy invasions of Central America. Not so much in the South America. We didn't get there yet, but then the war happened, and the war was about a change in policy toward the good neighbor.
You're talking about the Second War?
Second World War, and because we talked about after the Second War.
It's hard to keep track of our wars.
And the Second World War was an attempt. They needed Latin America. They didn't want conflict with Mexico, so they settled with Mexico over the oil nationalization. They expanded the Office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, who was Nelson Rockefeller, into beyond cultural exchanges, into economic development, and it became the mines were, there were scandals about how the conditions were, but most people accepted because the expansion of the coordinator's propaganda operations, most people accepted that this is a viable alternative to what they actually feared would be a fascist invasion of South America. The Middle East was a different experience. The Middle East was predominantly in a cultural and educational experience, starting with missionaries, and by the time they realized by the late 1920s, early 1930s, there was a conversion on the part of modern missionary movements away from the old Bible-thumping heavy and to accommodate themselves with nationalism. In other words, they were catching up with the Boxer Rebellion and the Chinese Revolution. They were catching up with the Mexican Revolution. They were catching up with the Russian Revolution. They realized there had to be a role for national, and they could not come on with this heavy colonial aping of the British. So what they really were won over was they were grappling. It was actually the missionaries would have, large underwriting by John D. Rockefeller Jr., put out a major book called Rethinking Missions. Very, very important work, and it had a great influence on modernist churches in the main denominations.
In Latin America, you think?
Well, it did influence Latin America, and I'll tell you.
Evangelicalism and Pentecostalism is running rampant in Latin America.
Except for one man.
Except for one man?
A man by the name of William Cameron Townsend.
Tell me.
Cameron Townsend is the other major figure in our book, Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller, and Evangelism in the Age of Oil.
Yes,
it's a long book, but I got the title in.
Yeah. Good.
William Cameron Townsend was the St. Paul of the evangelical movement. He is the man who built the largest non-denominational missionary organization in the United States.
Really?
It was called and still is. Yeah. It's a huge organization in countries around the world. It's known abroad by the name of the Summer Institute of Linguistics. It's known in the United States by the name of the Wycliffe Bible Translators. And they recruited Billy Graham. They were very famous.
Recruited Billy Graham?
They recruited Billy Graham.
That's like getting Babe Ruth.
That's right. Yeah. Not into the organization, but to at least get them large publicity at his rallies. And they were very close to him in North Carolina. And what was really important about all this is that Townsend recognized that there had to be an accommodation to modernism. he adopted Franz Boas's conceptions about anthropology.
Great anthropology.
He adopted some of the linguistics that were involved, the linguistic theory, phonetic linguistics that Kenneth Pike is very famous for in Texas and throughout really the evangelical world. Kenneth Pike became really his right-hand linguist, kind of the Chomsky of the phonetic world, phonetic linguistics world, and an opponent actually of Chomsky, and
politically, you mean?
Politically, as well as linguistically.
Right. Okay.
And,
as linguistically also. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
And whereas Chomsky would argue that every culture has its own genius. Kenneth Pike was more into the phonetics in order to change the culture, and he wanted Christian cultures. His conception of Christian cultures was Midwestern farming communities. That's essentially what...
Sort of like Jefferson.
Well, except that there was a corporate side to this.
Oh, I see.
The funding had to come from somewhere. The United States government provided some funds that helped that growth of that organization.
Yeah, we had that Homestead Act that ended just after. It was a halcyon era.
Well, it was actually Rockefeller's coordinators' money that went into some of the original bilingual education programs that got the Wycliffe Bible translator off with their first contracts in Latin America.
There was that political tie to the phonetics in the
Exactly.
alphabet. Back to that thing about the alphabet.
Exactly, and they knew that these people could, if they could reach recalcitrant tribes who were resisting incursions on their lands.
With the Bible?
By translating the Bible, by laying trinkets out, saying, we love you, we want to help you. And tribes would resist, but then on the other hand, the tribes would turn around and say, Jesus, here comes the army. These guys look pretty good. Let's cut it. So they would bring them in. Usually it was women, and so the tribes were not threatened, and they would come in and live with the tribe. Now, for instance, when I was researching this book, I would work with anthropologists, as well as talk with the missionaries.
What's the title again?
It's called "Thy Will Be Done."
Read it all out.
The Conquest of the Amazon, and the subtitle is Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil.
Okay, good. I'm glad
you got published by
that.
HarperCollins in 1995.
HarperCollins,
yes.
We got to get the... Okay, go ahead,
Yeah.
The thing is, the trouble,
I know, we get into
the
these...
The trouble is, you know what the hell of it is you're too interesting. I wish you could be more dull. Then we wouldn't know what to talk. We'd run out. We got so many things, and we got to get, if I may, that's interesting. We got another book of yours. Let's show them this, and that's the heck of it. This one's got another title, and it's got an introduction by Gore Vidal. That may set some of you off wrong, but not many. But it's Into the Buzzsaw. This is the way it looks. And what's it called again, this one?
It's called Into the Buzzsaw, Leading Journalists Expose the Myth of a Free Press.
That's a pretty good title to a lot of people who view conversation.
It's won a National Press Club Award.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And a few other awards. Here in New York, as a matter of fact, it was picked as one of the top 20 books by the Fifth Avenue Public Library.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And you are also, we haven't gotten into it because it's too interesting, you see. But you're an investigative journalist.
Yes.
And you're also the president of the National Writers Union. Some of this got to, and you've written a couple of other books.
Yes,
right?
I wrote a book. My first book was called DuPont Behind the Nylon Curtain.
Oh boy.
Which was a story in and of itself, the writing of it and the fact that DuPont Company made threatening phone calls to the Book of the Month Club and got them to drop it in 24 hours.
No kidding. And what did it get out again?
Well, they kept it all quiet from me, but they went through the motions of printing books, but they cut the print run, they cut the advertising. In the publishing industry, this is called privishing. It means to privately, as opposed to publicly, publish a book.
That's interesting.
To privately
publish. It's not Vanity Press.
It's used. No. It's used. This was Prentice Hall.
Yeah. Okay.
It's used by commonly as we privish the book so that it sank without a trace. The author doesn't know that this is a common industry practice. It is not, in my day.
Spell it out again. I'm sorry.
Privish.
No, I don't mean to spell it literally. What is it that's going on? Because I couldn't
it's
quite.
It's to kill the life support system of a book.
Okay.
If a book is troublesome either for political reasons or economically, and they want to breach the contract.
You want to breach the contract?
What they do quietly is cut the print run, cut the advertising budget, cut your tour down. They cut the life support system of the book so that it cannot price profitably according to any conceivable
That would
form
probably
yet.
apply to a movie also, or any
it
kind
might.
of thing that
It
goes
might.
out into the market.
That's right.
Why wouldn't they try to guard against that sort of thing before the initial contract was agreed to, like a feasibility study that would take into account
they're putting out a lot of...
you know what I'm saying?
This book was selling well,
Uh-huh.
and it got a rave 2-page review in the Sunday New York Times.
Congratulations.
It was taking off
Uh-huh.
as one of the top 50 books in the United Nations, but by cutting the print run, there weren't enough books.
And they were doing that from pressure from the company.
That's my argument, and I took them to federal court for 8 years
You
to
did?
prove it.
And
we won we won in the Southern District Court with a very conservative judge, the 4th judge that we had, actually. Others
good for you for fighting that,
down.
yeah.
And then we went on, and then they appealed to this. They let off DuPont, though. As a matter of fact, it was a really fascinating scene in the last DuPont family. We had subpoenaed all the DuPont family members that we knew were involved in this, and took their depositions in Delaware. You can imagine going into Delaware.
Yes, going in. That's like
and
going into
hailing them with
Battle of
federal
Hastings,
subpoenas
yeah.
and them coming down. And remember, Irene DuPont Jr. in particular.
Have you got that all on videotape?
we
I
got
hope it'd
some
make a
of
hell
it.
of a movie.
Very
wouldn't it?
few videos.
Yeah,
We have some
yeah.
videotape, but not very little.
Yeah.
But it hit the papers. You know, Governor DuPont, we subpoenaed him too, and all sorts of people that were involved in the suppression of this book. And we eventually, the judge in the Southern District of New York called in our attorneys into chambers and said to my attorney, he said, listen, I'm not going to find a pillar of American society like the DuPont family guilty of simply expressing their point of view. He said, Your Honor, they said the book was actionable to Book of the Month Club. They said that the book was scurrilous, that the family was moving against this. They were very upset. We found out later that they actually sent up trucks to U-Haul trucks to buy out in Philadelphia bookstores.
Actual bookstores?
Yeah, that's right. While I was on TV in Philadelphia promoting the book, no one could get a copy.
That's true.
This is really
that happens.
It happened then,
and you private source of
now
power.
what a lot of publishers would do in this, Harold, is that the publisher would say, "Wonderful, if he's a good publisher, we'll just simply print more."
Yeah, because all publicity is good.
This company, Prentice Hall, had made the decision to kill the book off.
And
So-
that's in response to pressure from
DuPont.
a special interest group.
That's right.
And that probably applies to media in general.
Oh, it does.
Those pressures
it's a
are
very
put upon,
serious.
and also maybe to the writers who might just internalize those values or something when they start thinking about is the book going to go, and that might bring us around to the National Writers
Well, it
Union.
does, as a matter of fact.
And the interests of the writers and the integrity
That's what
and the
brought me
personal,
into the National
personal
Writers Union.
integrity of the writers
Yeah.
and the context that can safeguard the personal integrity and
absolutely
interests
correct.
of the writer.
I'll tell you,
Is that something that makes sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does, because
Okay,
that's
and it's
chronologically,
important.
that's
and
exactly...
the media makers. You
That's
can say
exactly how I got
Not just
involved.
the writers, it's also the television guys and
Yeah.
the media and the multimedia. Yeah,
Well,
okay.
if you when the lower court came down with its decision, they were when the judge first turned to DuPont, to us, and say he was going to let DuPont off, even though they threatened suit. That's a inducement of breach of contract and so on. But he was going to let him go. But he turned to Prentice Hall and he said, if you're going to publish a book like this, because he was a very conservative Republican, he didn't like the book at all.
Who was the judge?
Yes, Charles Bryant. But he would turn to them and said, however, if you're going to publish this book, you must publish it and not privash it. So we had won that's right.
A new term.
We won a major thing. Then that very year, I was involved with some people in putting together what was called the American Writers Congress. And we expected about 300 writers to show up for it. Nation Institute had helped financially, and said 3,000 writers showed up. And they started to compare notes. And what we found out is that problems that we all thought were individual problems were not. That these were problems endemic to the industry.
And that was part of the leading up to the National Writers.
National Writers Union
Now,
came right out of the American
Another
Writers
problem
Congress.
is we only got about 10 minutes left, and we got about a 7-minute piece that really lays all this out, and it's important. I think we ought to get that in, don't you?
Yes.
We got that in, so we're talking now with Gerard Colby, a citizen extraordinaire on planet Earth, I might suggest, and we have a roll-in, a piece of video footage, about 6-7 minutes, about the National Writers Union, of which he is the president. a good organization that one and all ought to get behind. So if we got just about time to get it in, could you roll that tape now then, please, in the studio control room? Thank you.
I think the National Writers Union has been a great force for looking more pragmatically at the writer's life.
The National Writers Union is unique in that we are the only union for freelance writers.
I joined the Writers Union because I'm a writer, and writers need all the help they can get, in every defense, too.
I joined because I was very interested in the education they were giving writers here in New York, and also because early on they started looking at contracts and issues that were important to writers.
So I have a very strong network that's a phone call away, an email away.
The Writers Union told me how, basically contractually how to make money in this industry.
The rate that I've charged over the years would not be as high if it hadn't been for the Writers Union.
I went back and looked how much money did I make from subsidiary licensing over the years, and it's almost $10,000.
Publishers don't give us health insurance. The publishers don't give us libel and lawsuit insurance. To go out and buy these things individually is prohibitively expensive. We have to have a union that helps us have these basic things that our life requires.
Joining a National Writers Union is an excellent business decision for any independent writer. There's no question about it.
The union does help you become a better business person. It gives you the tools to maximize your work, negotiate better terms, and collect payment. And that gives you the freedom to become a full-time freelancer.
Another part of it for me as an old Detroit guy is the fact that it's the UAW, which means the fact that it's working people who take themselves seriously and aren't afraid to be working people and then also have a creative life.
It's like having a center in basketball. When you know you got the big man in the middle, you could do a lot of stuff. And the UAW is our big man in the middle.
Right now, the value of there being a union that sets standards for everybody, or is attempting to, couldn't possibly be more important.
Who owns the rights to material that is published and then archived on the internet? The freelance authors or the publishers?
The U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments in the New York Times versus Ticini, a case that pits big media concerns against a group of freelance writers.
The U.S. Supreme Court today ruled 7-2 that large media companies must get permission from freelance writers before reprinting their work online.
I think it's a very important case, and I think it's a case that other artists are going to lean on increasingly in times to come.
My articles had been appearing as a freelancer in the New York Times. We did know that we needed a new definition of copyright law for the electronic age. So when the suit began, that was really our intention. We need a legal definition of what does copyright mean today. And of course, for me, it was vitally important that I retained rights, especially subsidiary rights to my work. I mean, my two sons went to college on subsidiary rights.
I think the Writers Union has performed a great benefit, a tremendous service by vindicating this right of, for its members and for tens of thousands of other lucky writers who aren't its members.
My job basically is to help our writers to hook up with freelance and contract jobs.
By the time the union got started, I already had an established career. I've never used the job bank, but I was a 19-year-old writer once. I know how valuable it would have been.
It turned out to be a gold mine.
We've expanded out geographically, genre-wise and geographically, and we've actually had writers take jobs in Prague.
I read about the Writers Union, the job hotline. Tuesday morning I called the company, set up an interview for Wednesday afternoon, and I got a job that same day.
The agencies take far more money than they earn. They take 25 to 50% of what you earn. If I contract direct with the company, that's all mine. And I'm not paying money for getting nothing in return. The only expense you pay is first 3 months you pay a 10%. Monetarily, it's a total win.
And aside from the union being a very good organization, you know, and really like a grassroots union, also at the end of the day, if everything's gone well, I've helped somebody to find a job who needs a job, and how can you not feel good about that?
When something goes wrong, you can call and get a grievance officer who'll work with you on the grievance.
The grievance officer simply advocates for you. He calls, he writes, he explains why to the publisher, to the editor, why what they did was wrong.
But there is certainly money in these publications and in the industry to pay people well and to treat them well, and it's just a choice not to do it because people can.
The grievance officer will send a letter on union letterhead making a very strong assertion that this is what must be done in this time frame.
Often, that alone wins the grievance. Just a call, a letter.
The grievance process works. We've recovered over $1 million for writers and something around 700 grievances, and that's money that goes directly into writers' pockets.
We work by ourselves in a room. We don't interact with other people. We don't really understand about office politics and joining together. We're always alone. And maybe that's all the more reason why we need solidarity, why we need a union.
Whether you're a poet or whether you're a journalist or whether you're a novelist or whether you're a trade paper writer or whatever the various things you may be, this is the place where you can come and somebody will watch your back.
When you're standing across from your employer, you got 7,000 friends behind you.
Do you have libel insurance? How much do you pay for it? Do you have health insurance? How much do you pay for it? Do you have a pension fund? How much is in it? Do you know how to run it? What will you do if you can't work for a year? What will you do if you work for 5 years on a book and the publisher yanks the contract and demands the money back? Can you afford a lawyer to represent you? If that happens, who will you go to? Where will you find representation? If you can't answer yes to all those questions and you can't afford all those things, you need to be a member of the National Writers Union.
Well, okay. Make sure you got the mics up and everything. That's really interesting. That's well put together and everything. You're the president of that organization.
That's right.
Only got about a minute and a half or less, so maybe you could put a few points in there and how people can be in touch and that kind of stuff.
The most important thing is that writers tend to work alone and
Yeah.
feel powerless.
Right.
We're designed to really respect people's privacy, but at the same time to bring writers together to confront an industry that is now, with the growth of the internet, is making billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, and the writers are outside the income flow on the
writers
internet.
or the content providers.
They are.
You say writers, but there's also content providers that could get into the film or television
Well,
industry.
that's true too.
And
We
there's a lot of
actually,
freelancing
we're
going on
talking
there
to a
too.
lot of radio writers now as well,
Yeah.
and so what we're trying to do is encourage writers to come out, join us, get involved on whatever level that you feel you want to. We have, for journalists, all sorts of different types of writers. Freelance writers, we're the only union of freelance writers in the United States.
Okay, really? Why isn't there more of it? And I think we ought to roll the credits, I think, in the thing, because they're coming out of time. But why doesn't the process itself, because we have agents who are supposed to represent the people and that kind of thing, and everybody who gets successful gets an agent, why doesn't the system work to the benefit adequately of the writers in this case? I would say content providers. It might be beyond writers, but why doesn't the system work?
Power relations. In the United States, the publishing industry has been very conservative, never has had any unions inside the publishing industry beyond printers, a few shops. And if working people, including writers, do not have an organization that actually is at the bargaining table, and the United States, by the way, is one of the few countries in the advanced industrialized world that does not recognize the collective bargaining rights of freelance writers.
Wow, okay, freelance writers, freelance
journalists,
is it freelance
technical writers, freelance
you say
book
freelance
writers.
It's freelance, in the case of communication, it's freelance content providers.
Yeah.
And we got more and more people who do, but the system doesn't accommodate.
So
there needs a gap. You're filling
We're
really
filling a real
void.
need that is out there, and we're moving Congress as much as we can right now to try to introduce legislation that would legally recognize the antitrust exemption that writers should have, just like every other workers. The other thing is that
free freelancers.
Freelancers. And
Why does it does it apply to other than just writers? You say writers, but
well,
is
we
it
say
freelancers? Because there's a lot of freelancers in the economy.
No, we're just
could
writers.
you have a wider net?
We're just writers.
But what does
point.
it encompass generically a wider net?
No, we're
of
pretty
people?
much we're
Okay.
pretty much